Personalization. I think this is one of the most difficult cognitive distortions. It's one of the hardest to overcome. It creates an enormous amount of pain. It sends us into spirals of rumination, regret, preoccupation, often for no reason at all. So let's talk about what personalization is, why you might be doing it, and how to stop. So, the cognitive distortion of personalization is when we take on excessive responsibility for an event or situation. It could be an event where something goes wrong that was outside of our control, but we feel like it's our fault. Or it could relate to an interaction with another person where they say something to us and we personalize it like we really think it's about us or about something we did or the way we look or appear. And I would also add to personalization our interpretation that the other person's opinion is actually related to us. That one's going to be a little tougher, but I'll explain it. So, personalization can lead us to feeling guilty or ashamed for something that is really not our fault or not our responsibility. It can also lead us to anger and behaviors that might not be in our best interest because we are personalizing something. And as I mentioned earlier, it almost always causes some type of rumination. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done that. I should have thought about this first. I should have been able to prevent that. I should have given that person this response or that response, right? So we go over and over and over something in a very painful way. So I want to share an example of this. I was recently talking to a therapist who was quite upset that she had begun to implement a no-show policy, which, having been a therapist for 20 years, is a good idea, unfortunately. It's a necessary evil. But she hadn't had one. She began to implement it, and she had one client who was really angry about it. And he personalized it. He felt like it was being put in place because he had had a crisis 2 weeks earlier and couldn't show up, which is not why she put it in place. But he had that feeling that it was related to him. He felt it was super unfair because he almost never cancels. And he got really angry at the therapist. And then he told the therapist, I think this is going to ruin your business. I think you're going to lose a lot of clients. So he was clearly personalizing it. Now, the therapist was upset, one, that her client was upset, but then she also was upset that he was criticizing her business and basically predicting that her business would fail. She felt attacked. So she was also personalizing it. Now, let me explain that a bit, because the first example of the client personalizing it when it really had nothing to do with the crisis he had had or the fact that he had canceled, it was just a policy that makes sense. More and more people do it, and she needed to put it in place. So I think that probably makes sense to everybody that he was personalizing something that wasn't personal. But the therapist feeling criticized by the client was also personalization because he was just doing what he does. That's what he does. That's what he does when he gets angry. His modus operandi is that when he doesn't get what he wants, he kind of twists it to give a zinger. That's all he was doing. It doesn't even really mean that he questions her business judgment. He was just angry. So let me know if it makes sense to you that both of them were personalizing the incident. Now, why do we do this? Why do we personalize everything? One of the answers for this is that we are the stars of our own movies. Every single one of us, we walk around the world pretty much as if we are the center character in the play and the production, until we pause and back up and gain perspective that kind of like there's all these humans running around the planet thinking they're the star of the show, thinking they cause everything. Everything's about them, right? And this might sound critical, but it's just more I'm describing our experience of life and the way the human brain works. There's actually a concept from Buddhist philosophy of the me loop, the thoughts about me, right? I need to put this policy in place. I have this client who's angry at me. I da 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 da. Our me loop can be really painful. I think it causes a lot of our pain. But if we can begin to recognize that, unfortunately, most people are stuck in this me loop, then it's easier to see that their behavior or actions aren't necessarily about us at all. Okay, so step one to change this is pretty much the same no matter what cognitive distortion it is, but it's to recognize the pattern. Really begin to see when you might be personalizing, even if you really feel responsible for whatever, the other person's behavior or the event that happened. Really begin to recognize when you are taking responsibility for something that's not yours. Now, a subcategory of this pattern recognition for personalization is that some people tend to really be on the taking things personally side, like really taking anything somebody else says that's negative in a personal way. Whereas other people might be more in the pattern of taking responsibility for events that happen that are out of their control. So notice if you do both of those or if you do one more often than the other, and which of those causes you a lot of pain. And possibly if you do tend to ruminate, anytime you're ruminating, think through, is this from personalization? Because if it is, personalization is a cognitive distortion. Distortion means it's distorted, it's not accurate, it's not true. I can begin to question it. But before I move on to that one, within the category of taking responsibility for things that are outside of your control, it could be you're working on a project with a lot of people at work that fails, and yet you feel like it was your responsibility. And even if you're the boss, like, yes, ultimately within the hierarchy, you're going to be taking responsibility for it, but it's probably not all yours. Plus, there's so many factors of things that come in that are outside of our control with pretty much everything we do. If we're feeling fully responsible for something, could be the distortion. And another manifestation of this is for people who feel responsible for other people's feelings. So a number of my videos talk about the emotional caretaker in a family, the person who feels like it's their job to keep everybody else happy or keep other people from getting angry, calming people down, cheering them up. There's an element then where when people do get angry or depressed or are upset, and you feel responsible for that, you are personalizing that event. It's out of your control. Sort of a longer topic. I have a number of videos on it, but it's worth thinking through. So once you recognize that you've done this, instead of ruminating, come up with alternate scenarios. Challenge the thinking pattern. Coming up with alternate scenarios. What are some other explanations for why that project failed or why that person got upset? For the client and the therapist, if they had paused and said, okay, what are some other explanations for why my therapist put this policy in place? That man would have had a different way of thinking if he had asked that question. And then for the therapist, what are some other explanations for the attack on my business acumen? She would have been thinking about the problem differently. So you don't have to immediately tell yourself you're not responsible or this isn't personal, but just what could the other alternatives be? Simply opening up your brain to think those through will help enormously. Step 3, perspective, perspective, perspective. You can gain perspective by talking to somebody else, to a therapist, to a coach, to a friend. You can also gain perspective by stepping back and being like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm the center of this entire play, but that person is also feeling that way. And I'm a pretty minor character in their play, probably. I think a lot of the times when we get insulted by somebody, we're a pretty minor player in their life. And they may not have meant it at all, right? So thinking that through can help you with perspective. And then one of my favorite questions to ask myself is, what would I say to a friend? What would I say to a friend who is upset about this thing and maybe is personalizing it? Would I think it's their fault? Would I think they're a horrible person for having done whatever or not done whatever? Would I empathize and feel like, yeah, in your shoes, I probably would be really upset too, but since I'm not in your shoes, I can see a different way of looking at this. So what would you say to a friend? Now, the other cause of our personalizing things, other than the fact that we star in our own movies, is this concept of the negative core belief. So, for that man who was angry at his therapist, I would guess that one of his core beliefs is life isn't fair. I can't trust others, something along those lines. And for the therapist, I'm guessing there was some kind of negative core belief around her competence as a business person. It could be an I'm not good enough, or there might be some financial insecurity around I'm not really safe or I'm not secure, probably a better way to say it. So, our negative core beliefs will be driving the ways in which we are personalizing events, people, situations. I know lots of you already have my PDF. I've heard it's super helpful. Transform your negative core beliefs. But for those of you who don't have it, it's free. I really hope it's helpful, helps you identify what that negative core belief is and 3 ways to overturn it. So let me know if this was helpful, if this was a helpful way to think about personalization, and let me know what type of personalization you tend to do. All right, I'll see you next week.